Victor, more politics for you now. Big developments related to your privacy. President Obama drawing some boundaries here, calling for changes to the controversial program that stockpiles the phone records of hundreds of millions of Americans. Well, the NSA now has to get permission from a secret court to access the data. And the president wants the records shifted out of government hands, but some say it's just not enough. So let's talk to Democratic Representative Adam Schiff from Washington right now. He's a senior member of the House Intelligence Committee, and he's pushing legislation to further limit access to phone records. Congressman, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure.
Sure. So tell me first off, how do your proposals go further?
Well, they go further in that they answer a question the president left open yesterday, and that is, if you take the bulk metadata program away from the government, then what do you do with it? Who holds on to that data? And I think the program should be restructured in a way that the telephone companies hold on to their own data. They do this anyway, and I think we can develop the technological ability to get the information from those phone companies with court approval in the case-by-case basis where we need that information, where we think a number is connected. That's more protective of privacy. It still meets our national security objectives. That's how I would have gone farther, but I was pleased to see the president took the immediate step of requiring prior court approval. I think that's very important.
You know, some of your colleagues, I know, have expressed concern that individual records authorizations could take days to secure, which might, let's face it, be too long in the case of a possible terrorist attack. How do you respond to that?
Well, the president articulated in the bill that I introduced would do the same thing, that in an emergency, you can go directly to the telephone company, get the data, and then get court approval after the fact. And if the court says, no, you didn't have a sufficient reason to get those records, then they have to be expunged. So that meets the urgent needs, but there are going to be many cases where we get information. It may be about an historic plot. We want to find out if there are connections between people where there isn't the same time sensitivity. That may be the case more often than not. But in those cases, you should get prior court approval. In the true emergencies, then you can go to the provider first and go to the court shortly thereafter.
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit more about that and these recommendations that would need, you know, congressional approval. Privacy advocates at the Secret Surveillance Court, as I understand it. Who should they be? I mean, when should they be pressed into action? How is that protocol going to work?
Well, I think that we don't want the privacy advocate or the adversarial process in every single garden variety warrant, which would be like having an adversarial process every time you needed a search warrant. But instead, in those broad programmatic requests of the FISA court, for example, when the government comes every 3 months and says, we want to renew the metadata program, or we want to start a new program, or there's a unique issue of constitutional law that's raised, those are the cases where you want someone that can say to the court, you know, better way to do this. We don't need to get all these records, or we haven't met the constitutional standard. So in those cases, which are relatively few in number but very important, that's when you want the advocate. And those advocates, I think, should come from outside the court. They shouldn't be a court clerk or a court lawyer, but rather I would like to see the Privacy and Civil Liberties Board appoint these attorneys or gather a panel of these attorneys that the court could then draw on in these important cases.
Okay, we only have a second left, but I know you've expressed concern that a, quote, very dysfunctional Congress won't be able to pass some of the NSA reforms. What are your biggest concerns?
Well, particularly on the metadata program, that's been very controversial. I would like to see the administration do as much as it can without waiting for the Congress. But we do have an end date. The program will expire of its own terms in the middle of next year. So if Congress can't rise to the occasion to legislate here, that program will go away completely next year.
All righty. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for making time for us.
Bet.
We appreciate it. Boy, Victor, you know, there's this whole idea of balance, too. People say, listen, I don't want people in on everything that I'm doing, and at the same time, when a terrorist attack happens, they say, where were you and how much did you know and why didn't you know more?
Question is, are you willing to give up a little bit of privacy to get more security? Are you willing to give up a little more security to get a little more privacy? And that conversation will continue. Yeah.